So it says for me to introduce myself and tell you that I am a senior fellow at AUSA. I am a 6-year retired, Chief Warrant Officer 5, Military Intelligence, and I've seen a number of my intelligence and other warrant officers that have seen me all day today and go, what are you doing speaking on this kind of a panel? Because I know precious little on integrated air and missile defense. But I don't need to know a lot about that to read a script for a couple of minutes, so here I am. The Association of the United States Army, your professional association, plays a crucial role in supporting and educating Army professionals and those who support our Army. They offer a variety of forums and events throughout the year for your professional development. AUSA amplifies the U.S. Army narrative to audiences inside the Army and helps to further the association's mission to be the voice for the Army, support for the soldier. Of course, we cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, the Pentagon, and the Defense Industrial Base, and to the public in communities across the country through AUSA's 122 chapters spread across the United States and 9 other countries. By a show of hands, how many of you are members of AUSA? Oh, that's a really good show of hands. And for everyone, if you registered for this AUSA conference, whether you know it or not, you're a member now. That was part of the, you checked a block, you joined. Even those that are not part of the United States Army. The good thing is, that is the basic membership package and there is no fee whatsoever. But we do encourage you to upscale to the premium package, and you can stop by the AUSA Member Zone, which is located at the L Street Bridge near Halls D&E to sign up, or you can sign up online at ausa.org/membership. Again, we cannot do these kind of incredible panel discussions without your help. So on behalf of General Brown, AUSA's President and CEO, and the rest of the AUSA team, all of our panel members get an incredible gift as a token of our support and thanks, and it is an AUSA umbrella in the classic Army green, except it does have the AUSA logo on it. And this is thanks for your support today and in hopes that you do not need to use it anytime soon. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bruce Brown, the Vice President of Business Development Mission Systems at Collins Aerospace, RTX. Sir?
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, folks here. I'd like to thank AUSA first and foremost for the opportunity to speak with all of you this afternoon. You know, when we think about what the next battle space may look like for the Army, we see a highly contested fight across multiple domains. And we see disparate forces in austere, remote environments charged with being the first line of defense across incredible distances. My time maintaining the readiness of a Patriot battery, which does feel like many moons ago, the fire control system here carried the weight of defending the homeland from threats that travel 15,000 miles an hour. Place that mission closer to the tactical edge with threats that are closer, faster, and frankly more unpredictable, then we have service members who are at serious risk of being overwhelmed. So how do we help them? By ensuring the connections between joint and combined forces are more resilient, that the data and intelligence they pass and visualize in a shared picture gives them an uncluttered view of the battle space that eases the weight of the mission they already carry. With better, deeper situational awareness from sensing solutions that see farther and prioritizing the data that they collect. With precision effects that are smarter and capable of retasking and providing better assessment of how they effectively close decision loops. These are capabilities that you can find across RTX and its businesses, both Raytheon and Collins Aerospace. The discussion you'll hear shortly on integrated air and missile defense is a capability area that Raytheon has long been a leader in. The Patriot missile defense system it provides has seen rigorous modernization since my time as a tactical control officer in 11th Brigade. The flexibility of its design will allow upgrades for years to come, and the broad spectrum of expertise and capabilities housed inside of the RTX family of systems here enables us to advance solutions and contexts, larger mission chains, partners networks than they ever did before. Ultimately, we deliver the technology and the advantage to our warfighters and the combined forces needed to outpace the threats. That is a vision we share as the largest air and defense company in the world. I want to thank you all for your time and participation in the panel discussion we're about to hear, and to this great event that the Association of the United States Army so steadfastly delivers and hosts, that we as an industry get to learn so much from. So thank you. And with that, Tom, sir, over to you, and thank you, panelists.
Well, thank you, sir, and thanks to General Brown for the invite to be here, and General Smith and Alana Jewett, who really put all this together. I tell you what, I'm Tom Carrico. I direct the Missile Defense Project at CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies. My program focuses specifically on air and missile defense. We've been doing that for about 9 years. We do a lot of events. We do a lot of analysis. We have a lot of these gentlemen over to speak and talk about these issues and try to shape the policy discussion. I opened the Wall Street Journal today and saw 2 stories about air and missile defense. One, talking about the THAAD, potential THAAD deployment here soon to Israel, and the second, a big expose on the counter-UAS problem that we're having here at home, for instance, and our challenges of getting after that. So suffice to say, I think it was former Assistant Secretary of Defense John Plum who said, look, these are not boutique problems, these are weapons of choice. We're seeing it everywhere. It's a ubiquitous kind of a challenge, and so I'm really glad that we have a opportunity. We have a full 90 minutes to dig into this stuff, and it's a packed room, it's a packed threat space, and we've got 3 superb gentlemen to kind of help us walk through this. So we're going to start off with some remarks by Honorable Gabe Camarillo, Undersecretary of the Army. We'll then turn to Lieutenant General Sean Gainey from Space and Missile Defense Command, and then Major General Frank Lozano, PEO, Missiles and Space. So Gabe, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank AUSA for putting this event together. It's another fantastic conference, and I think it's amazing that we're going to be able to have the conversation we're having today. I also want to thank my fellow co-panelists for participating in this very important topic. So I was really excited to be a part of today's conversation when we started planning for this year's annual conference, because this has been one of the most significant areas that I've spent my time in as Undersecretary of the Army. Integrated air and missile defense and the range of threats that we face has changed significantly in the 3 years alone that I've been serving in this position. I hearken back to my first time in the Army, which was about 10, 15 years ago, and in many ways, the Army was moving away from air and missile defense. There were programs for development that had been canceled. As we looked at budget crunches in the future years, there were areas that we chose to take risk in this area, and primarily the Army at the time was focused on the threat on the ground, primarily from IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Times are very different today. The threats have become much more sophisticated. We face, as Tom just said, the threat of proliferated small UAV systems around the globe, all the way to cruise missile threats, ballistic missile threats, and even hypersonics. Against this environment, I will say that this has been an area of significant focus and determined investment by the Army over the last several years. But at the same time, we are only as effective as our soldiers make us effective. And this has been one of the most stressed elements of the force in the Army for several years now, reaching in many ways a deploy-to-dwell ratio that is below many of the concerned areas that we face or that we scrutinize across the Department of Defense. So what are we doing about that? Certainly at the same time that we face a recruiting challenge, part of the effort is in our efforts to grow the force, we are trying to recruit new soldiers and air defenders who will man these units. We are looking at incentives to allow us to encourage these soldiers to re-enlist or to stay within the air defense community. And we're also trying to find ways that are very focused to improve quality of life and to reduce some of the inimical effects of frequent deployments on them and their families. But ultimately, the only way that we're going to make things better is by growing force structure. And I'm very pleased to say that we announced last year, as part of the Army's transformation, a significant investment in growth structure, particularly in this space. Two Patriot battalions, 9 IFPC battalions, 8 MSHORAD Sergeant Stout battalions, and 9 counter-UAS batteries all form some of the force structure changes that we announced late last year. And at the same time, if you look at our budget, there has been a significant emphasis on modernization across the board. If you look at the FY25 budget submission, $5.6 billion, which is a 77% increase in integrated air and missile defense capabilities compared to the year prior. And this goes to everything, not just modernizing Patriot and through the LTAM sensor, incorporating the Integrated Battle Command System, IBCS, that ties it all together from a C2 perspective, building our new IFPC capabilities, and buying interceptors like PAC-3 MSE and AIM-9X that we use to engage the threats. In addition to significant investment that we're making in counter-UAS solutions, and we'll talk a lot about that today, to include both kinetic and non-kinetic solutions against those threats. Overall, this is an area that I see us continuing to place a significant emphasis on for years to come. Not only is the Army called upon to provide air and missile defense capabilities in key hotspots in the world like CENTCOM, as we just heard about today, we also see that there's growing demand in Indo-PACOM, in Europe, elsewhere in the world as we see the threats proliferate. So I look forward to today's conversation and sharing the stage with all of these experts to discuss this very important topic.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask General Gainey and General Lozano to give some open remarks as well. I just want to say you all should have question cards. If you have a question, please be aggressive in flagging down this gentleman over here. He'll collect them for you and bring them up to me. I think that's how they're handling the questions. So please, I've got lots of questions, but the more that you can throw up, the less they have to hear from me. So, General Gainey, over to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here on the panel with the Undersecretary of the Army and my good friend Frank Lozano. It's even better when you have a great day to have air missile defense as a featured item and a panel. But it's even better when the Secretary opens up her comments highlighting integrated air missile defense and talking IBCS and LTAM. So great day for the branch and great day for air missile defense. The undercovered predominantly most of the topics I want to highlight, but one of the topics I think is worth reinforcing and something I always highlight whenever I speak is about the great soldiers in the air defense branch. We ask a lot of our air defense soldiers, as the under highlighted, with the readiness and the op tempo, and it's amazing how they always respond day in and day out. And even with the recent call, our soldiers are ready to go and respond to the global requirements that are out there. And as all you have to do is turn on the TV these days and you see a conflict, a war, in the drone-centric war, the missile-centric wars that are out there, really leverage our capabilities, and all the warfighters and combat commanders and all the countries out there want a piece of air and missile defense. And I'm so proud of our soldiers and the way they continue to respond, and the families that are there to support them. And as we move forward, what we'll highlight today is the Army recognizes this challenge, and the Army understands that our ability to get around the op tempo is our investment in our modernization moving forward. We have relied too long on the Patriot system as the centric system to air and missile defense. As we are modernizing now with our short-range air defense and moving forward with our IFPC cruise missile defense and our improvements to our current system with the integration into IBCS, it will eventually start to relieve that significant threat, because the threat's not going away. The threat's going to be there. And near and dear to my heart, counter-UAS. And as we integrate counter-UAS systems into our IBCS Central C2 system, we'll continue to find more efficiencies as we move forward. So excited to be here. Look forward to your questions, and I'll pass it over to Frank.
Thank you, sir. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here today as a part of this very distinguished panel. And I have had the privilege of leading a phenomenal organization in PEO Missiles and Space for the last 2 years, an organization made up of just some simply remarkable individuals who seem to accomplish a myriad of tasks for our Army all across the globe. I couldn't be more proud of what that team is doing every day. When I talk about what it is that the PEO does for our Army, I break it up sort of into operational terms. We have a close fight requirement, we have a near to mid-range fight requirement, and then we have a deep fight requirement. From a fight tonight, close fight perspective, we're providing capability into EUCOM and Ukraine. We're providing on a daily basis critical counter-UAS capabilities in the CENTCOM, and we're focused on developing the Guam Defense System architecture. From a mid to near range capability perspective, we're focused on our key modernization efforts managed by the AMD CFT, IBCS, LTAMS, IFPC, and MSHORAD. As many people know, one signature modernization effort in a branch is normally a huge, significant deal. To be modernizing 4 key components of an air and missile defense architecture kill chain is huge. It's not only stressing us to be aggressive, to field, to develop, procure, field that capability, but it's also forcing us to change how we think about employing that capability and ultimately how we fight. From a deep perspective, it's all about integrated fires. It used to be about integrated defensive fires, but since the IBCS Increment 3 CDD has been AROC approved, now it's about offensive and defensive integrated fires. And how do we do that? How do we get inside the enemy's kill chain and rapidly facilitate decision-making at command echelon levels so that we hold the enemy at bay and we force the enemy to react to us, not vice versa? I'll just cap that off by saying about 1.5 years ago, I took a trip over to Poland to visit the Ukrainian soldiers training on the first 2 batteries of Patriot that we were donating to them. One was a U.S. battery, one was a German battery. I had the privilege of eating lunch with some of those Ukrainian air defenders, and at the end of that lunch, I asked them, I'm curious, and this was actually a question that General Karbler had asked me a number of years ago. I said, I'm curious, based on your employment of Patriot and Avenger and Hawk and Stinger Manpad systems and NASAMS, how are you managing the battle space to ensure you have the most efficient application of combat power against the threats that Russia is throwing at you? And they said, you know, sir, you've hit on our most significant struggle. If there was a way that we had a system that could integrate all of those capabilities, that would make us much more effective in that employment of combat power. Do you have something you can give us? And I said, well, I can't get ahead of the president. I'm not allowed to offer anything up, but I will tell you that we've recognized that same thing. And so when a lot of people ask me, what are some of the most important lessons that we've learned from Ukraine, from an air and missile defense perspective, what has been reaffirming to me is that the modernization path that we are on is exactly the right path to be on to ensure that if called, we can fight and defeat, but until that point in time, we can deter both our pacing threat and our acute threat. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. You know, I think I want to start off with the force structure thing. You mentioned the announcements last year. This is probably something for you, sir, and for you, General Gainey, for instance. So the IFPC, the Patriot, the COAS, the Stryker, the SHORAD announcements, how has it come? How far have we come since that announcement? How far along in that? How's the schedule for the realization of those boosts to the ADA?
Well, it's absolutely critical that we grow the force structure to meet the demand that we can't keep up with, both from COCOMs and all the hotspots around the world. In addition to the fact that we see that demand growing, particularly given the partnership with the Air Force, as they're looking to employ agile combat employment, for example, in the Indo-Pacific region. So our plan that we announced was set to grow all of these ADA capabilities between FY25 and FY29. And so we are on plan right now, and I think a lot of the emphasis right now in recruiting, in our retention efforts, is designed to have the manpower that we need, the personnel, to be able to man these units. The development of the systems and capabilities is going very well, and I would defer to General Lozano. I think you can speak to that. But we have this plan. And frankly, it's because we know over the same time frame, the world is not getting any safer, and these threats continue to proliferate.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Picking up on what the under highlighted, we have those formations standing up in our Army right now. So, for example, 1st Armored Division has their short-range air defense battalion integrated right now. We have young lieutenants and platoon leaders that are taking their platoons to NTC to train with the brigade combat team. So that's happening now. We've also have 1st Cav Division, and in Germany we have 5-4 ADA that's integrated in Europe. So these are organizations fielding this capability, and some are fielded. And we have the counter UAS batteries integrate into those divisional ADA formations. So our modernization is coming to life as we speak. You know, you often hear the chief talk about transforming in contact. We are doing that, taking the capability we have, building that capability. Soldiers are learning now and continuing to improve that capability. Also, from the IFPC perspective, we have stood up 151 ADA in support of the 1st MDTF. They are fielding the launchers for counter-cruise missile capabilities, and they're also fielding high-powered microwave type capabilities. So taking capability we fielded, innovative future technology for the future test net in the hands of soldiers moving forward. So again, we're not conceptualizing what's going to happen inside our branch. We're talking about what's actually happening and what the future looks like moving forward.
Can I come back to you on the cooperation, the working with the Air Force on ACE, for instance? This gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of references to Key West. There's a lot of references to what's the Army doing on air defense lately. Could you describe what you highlighted there in terms of working with the Air Force on this? Because there's nowhere near enough air defenses for all of our air bases, for all of our bases. How would you characterize that cooperation?
Sure. Well, I think it's helpful for the audience to understand what agile combat employment is. You know, the Air Force recognizes that for their sorties to be survivable and effective in a potential Indo-PACOM scenario, it's all hinged upon their ability to disaggregate and aggregate in mass very, very quickly across different bases that in many cases have to be able to operate on a moment's notice throughout the Indo-Pacific region. And they are going to look, instead of having the Air Force defend those bases, to have the Army play a role in doing so. Traditionally, we have the assets and we're growing the force structure to be able to do it. Now, where we defend, in what quantities and with which capabilities, is part of the analysis that's going on right now with the Air Force. And it has been going on. And frankly, myself, the Undersecretary of the Air Force, Melissa Dalton, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Jim Mingus, and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Jim Slife, we have met several times together and developed the right teams working together at the operational level to kind of flesh this out. And ultimately what it will do is provide some specificity on how we will move forward to implement and operationalize our cooperation in this effort.
Yeah. You mentioned as well, I think a couple mentioned the formations thing. And I know this is a topic in discussion for the Army warfighting concept, which I know is not done. There's been, in the past, I would say 5. I see Randy McIntyre over here. He used to talk about composite units when he was at the CFT, for instance. How would you characterize the formations adapting to the fact that, well, everybody needs CUAS, for instance. Right. It's good basic training, but frankly, everybody needs air defense generally. So at the concept level, admittedly, it's not out yet. Talk to us about formations and how they need to change, and then if you gentlemen want to jump in as well.
Sure. I'm sure that both of these gentlemen have a lot to say, and I'll start and let you all jump in. We very much have taken to heart the idea that we have a layered defense approach to air and missile defense. And the threats, as I said at the opening, are all the way from Class 1 small UAS systems all the way to the ballistic and hypersonic threats. And so all of the units, the force structure that we're building and growing is tailorable, it's adaptable, and it is able to kind of flexibly meet whatever needs we have in any hotspot in the world. So the 9 counter-UAS batteries, for example, that General Gainey talked about that are already fielding capability today, what's great about it is we're not relying on just the systems that they're currently deployed with today. We're continuing to experiment. We're continuing to bring in new technology into those formations to be able to give them the tools they need to adequately defend against the threat. And again, we can compose this in any shape or fashion. What's neat, for example, about our force structure is you take our IFPIC battalions. They are part of our multi-domain task forces, which can be tailored, again, to any scenario in the world. And we're already seeing some success with how we're doing that right now today. But I'll certainly defer to General Gainey and talk a little bit more about how those units work.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. So Deander already highlighted really the aspects of the formation. So I'll go in a little more detailed on specifically inside of, for example, as you have the Integrated Battle Command System, which serves as the central fire control system. And our ability now to plug and play capabilities inside of that formation, tailor that capability, and then swap out technology as technology evolves, allows us to get capability out rapidly to the warfighter and then constantly transform as we move forward. In a specific area I'd like to highlight is the composite formations. By developing IBCS, we can now take a standard Patriot battery and make that Patriot battery flexible and adaptable to the threat to where as the adversary is employing capability, they're employing it 360 complexity. By forming composite formations, we're now able to disperse those formations, tailor those formations where they can defeat a range of threats with 360 capability, almost doubling the capability we can put out today with the standard Patriot formation. So I'll pass it over to Frank for anything else.
And to dovetail on that, so from a materiel perspective, if I'm doing my job right as an Army acquisition officer, I'm providing my senior leaders options and decision space. As soon as I start to make decisions that limit what they can do, I've done my job improperly. And so the reason I highlight that is based off of the composite nature of future air and missile defense battalions. And from a material perspective, it's based on an ability for everything to work together. So right now at White Sands Missile Range, I have my team there supporting our IFTIC 24, which is the Integrated Fires Test Campaign 24. It's the third iteration of our Integrated Fires Test. And I've got Patriot, IBCS, Sentinel, LTAMS, and IFPIC all out there. Every year, we're going to add more capability to that architecture until we're ready to deploy the system, the composite architecture out to Guam defense, out to Guam. But the important aspect of that is that what I want to be able to do is to be able to provide a Chinese menu, if you will, to combatant commanders so that once they perform their assessment of the threat, they can say, Frank, give me 3 of those, 1 of those, 10 of those, 4 of those. And we deliver that capability integrated and able to function and work together to defeat any threat any given combatant commander faces. So from a material perspective, it's all about integration for us.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the Chinese menu is you don't necessarily broadcast in advance to the enemy what exactly the structure is that they have to contend with. The other big thing, I think everybody kind of mentioned it, is op-tempo. And here I want to go to the headlines. All right, the talk about an additional THAAD being deployed forward to our friends in Israel. And of course, they've been at the receiving end for some pretty robust threats in April and again this month. I don't want to touch the policy issues here, but I wonder if maybe a couple of you could talk to us about the what that means, that when a transportable THAAD unit is sent to Israel or somewhere like that, what does that do to its capability, to its flexibility to go elsewhere in the world, for instance? What is the cost on the soldiers and all that kind of stuff? What is the opportunity cost? What is the real cost? This doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen with a light switch. It does take some time. So help us understand kind of the magnitude and the opportunity cost of what that kind of a decision means.
Well, as I said at the outset, Tom, this is a aspect of the Army where I think the deploy to dwell ratios already send us some warning signals in terms of, high op tempo, stress on families, concerns about retention, frankly, from just the amount of workload that we're putting on our air defenders. And I give my tremendous appreciation to them because they are extremely professional, dedicated, talented men and women who, despite this, they continue to perform the mission every single day. Certainly, I think with any deployment, there are always things that you would like to be able to plan for. On the equipment side, it is the ability to do reset, repair, software upgrades, things that Frank and his program managers within the PEO try to plan on some level of predictable basis, assuming they know whether it's Patriot radar or it's obviously a different piece of equipment coming back in for reset and repair. But on the human side, it is the predictable nature of knowing, when your mom or dad is going to come home, being able to spend time with your family, being able to plan, the next PCS move and where you're going to live, where you're going to do all of those personal things. And that is the part where these frequent deployments can always present some challenges. But I think what we try to do is we manage the force as best we can to try to mitigate some of the most challenging aspects of it for individual soldiers and their families. But I think more broadly, the only solution, I think, is to grow the force structure that, frankly, that we have at our disposal to meet the demands of a very, very complex world.
Yeah. We talked some of the operational and modernization effects of real-world deployments, be it MSE. Of course, we got Aegis destroyers and now THAAD going over there.
The only thing I'd add, DeAndre did a great job of highlighting the impacts. The only thing I would add to that is I'm not sure we'll know the full implications in the short term. It'll take a while. We've worked closely with the Army and the senior leaders in the Army to embed additional behavioral health personnel inside of our formations to help get after some of the challenges that we're creating. Because in the near term, you talk to the soldiers, you talk to some of the junior leaders, they love doing their mission, and they love doing their mission where they get that sense of value to the nation. Because every time they're called, right now, you can only imagine what's going through the minds of those soldiers that are deploying that THAAD battery. There's a mix of excitement. There's also a mix of, unpredictability, which is probably the biggest impact. So balancing that with the long-term effect is not so much the deployment, but as the extensions, the not coming back when you think you're going to come back, and it's always a guessing game. That's where the impact really sets in with the family. So you have the family moving somewhere, and you have the family doing something. You can't tell your family how you're going to, when you're going to be back or when you can get back to some normalcy is our biggest challenge. And I don't think we'll know the full effect of that for a while now. But I tell you, our soldiers do it, and it's a tough situation because, nobody can do what our soldiers can do. You can have some limited capability with some of our other services, but these soldiers are doing something that nobody else can do. We have men and women in harm's way that they're protecting. So it's a fine line, fine balance to that as we move forward. So we will continue to surge. We will continue to look at opportunities to incentivize our great soldiers and also look for ways to reduce the impact. But I'm honest when I talk to the soldiers and leaders of the Air Missile Defense branches, we are not going to realize the benefits of this until we modernize, grow the force, because like I highlighted earlier, the threat is not going to go away, and I don't expect a reduction of that anytime in the near future.
As a member of a supporting command to maintain and sustain op-tempo and operational employments, what I would say is I attack it from the mobilization of the industrial base perspective, right? So we have funded many of our industrial base partners to increase capacity, whether it's a Coyote missile or a PAC-3 MSE, I'm meeting regularly with congressional staffers to request their support for the president's budget which I will say adequately resources me to meet our op tempo across the Army. And so for me, it's about on-time deliveries of capability to meet the demands that the Army is putting on our force to support those globally deployed units.
I think this has been very productive and I think important because, you know, I think as you, General Gandy, has said before, you know, it used to be that they would say missile defense is not possible, and now we're not doing it cheaply enough. But I just worry that it's being taken for granted as a free good, and when we expend a year's worth of SM-3s in a day, you know, and when we chew up MSCs and things like that, it chews into inventory, but there's a lot of other costs. And I know the headlines will talk about the cost of a THAAD versus the cost of an Iranian such and such, but it is the day-to-day operational cost. It is measured in all the ways you gentlemen are describing that is far more than just the cost of the round. But a couple of you mentioned the budget. Yes. I think it goes up to almost $7 billion with a B for Army air and missile defense modernization by 2027. I look at that and I think it starts to wane off a little bit. This is kind of the heyday for the Army air and missile defense to catch up for those wages of divesting from this threat. Do you believe that can be and will be sustained? I mean, the threat is there. We're seeing the threat, but do you believe that's going to be sustained, do you think?
Well, what I would say, you know, over the 3 years I've had the privilege of working in this role, we've been able to sustain it despite relatively flat top line for the Army and stable budgets year over year. I think it's in recognition of the fact that it is one of the areas where we have the highest demand. I will certainly say across the department, it's an area of significant emphasis for investment. The number of meetings I spend in the Pentagon discussing our air and missile defense modernization and both current and future needs, there's a lot of those. So I will say that, you know, we can't afford not to make it an area of sustained focus.
Yeah. I wonder if each of you might react. And by the way, please do submit your questions. This gentleman over here, bring them up anytime, and I'll weave them in. And I know there's a lot of smart air defenders out there that have things I'd like to pose. But while they come up, let me ask you about how you make the trades between, you know, given what you're seeing in EUCOM and CENTCOM and in INDOPACOM, how are you seeing the threat and how are you adapting? You know, a little more in NGSRI, a little more in IFPC second missile, you know, throttle down on this, but maybe less LTFI. What are you seeing in the threat and how are you making those trades?
Well, let me start and I'll let my colleagues jump in as well because I'm sure they all have perspectives from where they sit. From where I sit, I will say that we have benefited significantly from the generosity and support on a bipartisan basis from Congress in the supplementals. So what that's allowed us to do, for example, is to buy inventory of, you know, to meet back current near-term requirements for things like PAC-3 MSC, AIM-9X missiles, et cetera. What we have also been able to get with Congress's support is investment in production capacity so that we can obviously invest to have surge capacity for production into the future. And we've been able to do things that we haven't done before, like have the first year, multi-year contract for production on PAC-3 MSC, which sends a message of stability to the industrial base, particularly on a very, very important interceptor we're going to have in the inventory for many, many years to come. So offsetting that in the base budget, we know that we have to place the right combination of bets on near-term capabilities, and we also have to continue to modernize and evolve. So what that means is today's interceptor, you know, we want to work with the industrial base to continuously improve it, both in terms of range, capability, other aspects and other features that it has. We hear a lot, for example, about investment in new command and control systems, the ability to converge all of these capabilities together through IBCS. There are fire control systems that I know that we're looking to modernize in the future. But in addition to that, I will also say it's thinking long enough ahead about what comes next. One area, for example, that the Army has invested a lot in is in the area of directed energy and you know, non-kinetic solutions. And a place where we are fielding capabilities today. We're putting them in operational conditions. And we're learning a lot about how effective they are and can be against this range of threats. So I think we're placing the right combination of things that are both immediate and a little bit longer term.
Only thing I would add to that is as the threat continues to evolve and we see the actual employment of that capability against our soldiers help speed up some of the focus in some of the areas. For example, counter UAS. And, I think it's good probably at this point to highlight from counter UAS perspective as we look at the different levels, because you'll hear us talk counter UAS and drone warfare. We're talking mostly from the integrated air missile defense approach, because you now have these Group 3 drones, one-way attack, that essentially bleed the lines of a cruise missile, the way they're detected, tracked, and engaged. And then you have some of your smaller quadcopter elements that are more of your force protection. Anybody has to be able to get after that threat. So when I'm looking at the use of drone warfare, specifically the one-way attack drones, now where you have countries spending dollars to produce thousands a month of these type of threat sets. So there's going to be a lot of focus on that area, and we focused on that area with some of the capability. And what the under highlighted is we've even expedited some of that capability into theater because we have to, but we're learning from it, and it'll eventually inform some of the integrated air missile defense systems to get after some of our more complex type of threat. So I think the way the threat employs capability and the way the threat constantly innovates has a say in how we apportion some of our funding as we move forward in this portfolio.
Tom, I think a key component of that from a PEO perspective is ensuring that going into the future, these incredible capabilities remain affordable. We spend a lot of time in contract negotiations. We spend a lot of time reviewing costs. We spend a lot of time reviewing company quarterly reports to understand how businesses are running and the actions that businesses are taking to implement cost controls. A positive facet of that discussion is the booming FMS market. And so fortunately, because our systems are performing so well abroad, there's been a lot of FMS demand for those systems, and I can leverage those dollars to get down the learning curve faster. I can leverage those dollars to support multi-year contracts. I can leverage those dollars for FMS lift from a modernization perspective as well. So the key thing that I've got to be able to do for the Army is keep these systems affordable so that if budgets get tighter in the future, we can continue to afford to procure them.
Yeah, the fact we had to pause MSCs, FMS exports, means we gotta get the production up before we can, of course, get them out there. And on that specific topic, I guess I would point back to you, to other folks, is what do you see as some of the biggest bottlenecks and the biggest limitations? I want to get to the cost in a minute here, but the biggest limitations and bottlenecks to what you just said right there, either on the cost reduction or increase in quantity of production, things like that. Because when the White House comes out and says we can't send any Patriots or AMRAAMs to any of the other 17 Patriot operators in the world, that got people's attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would focus in on two areas. One is microelectronics. Much of what we produce today from a military perspective consumes microelectronics. It's driven by the commercial market, and so much of what we buy and put into our weapon systems goes obsolete after about 4 to 7 years, and so we remain in a constant cycle of addressing obsolescence and then requalifying production lines or requalifying systems so that we avoid having a bottleneck, but that in and of itself can sometimes create one. The second thing that I spend a lot of time doing is quality control on manufacturing and production lines. It's a little bit disturbing when I'm out visiting a manufacturing plant and I identify how many processes are still manual. I've found work instructions that have been photocopied so much they're illegible. I've surveyed manufacturing and production lines where there's very little statistical process control. I can almost guarantee that if there's a manual process on a production line, it's likely that that process is out of control. And so the investment helps, the demand signal helps, stability across the supply base helps. But if all I'm getting is 70% yield at the end of the day off of a production line, we're missing the mark and we're getting behind. And so statistical process control, quality manufacturing, and the microelectrics industrial base are key components of us trying to make sure we're ramping up and delivering the right amount of equipment at the right time.
Can I just say, I mean, I think that that's what we've tried to do the last several years, is send a strong demand signal to the industrial base so that it can better plan for what this environment is that we're talking about today. Recognizing that, even 10 years ago, Army Air and Missile Defense as a portfolio was probably subordinate in terms of the amount of investment to things like aviation, combat vehicles, et cetera. Now it's, I think, the highest overall, if not close to the highest. And I think that reflects kind of the urgency we all see.
Yeah, I forget how many tens of billions of dollars of FMS cases have kind of been approved, but not necessarily getting on a contract just yet. On that front, I got a question that just came in, and this is to you, Secretary Cambrio, specifically about FMS. How can we increase partnership capacity with FMS with our new modernization components? For example, a new sensor that can plug into host nation command and control architectures. So how can we get our latest and greatest out to our friends to get them the capability they need today?
Yeah, well, I think we have to recognize that the FMS environment with our partners and allies is complex. I think all of them, as a general matter, want to be interoperable and compatible with the United States, and particularly they appreciate the investment we've made to bring really what is the best technology forward. And as General Lozano said, if you look at what's happening in the news every single day, it's proving itself on the battlefield. So that part kind of makes the case for itself. In other cases, they all have their own independent air missile defense architectures. Some of them have unique considerations of legacy components that may or may not need to be integrated. And I think General Lozano and his team, they do a tremendous job of working with partners and allies to figure out what works best for them, but at the same time promoting the interoperability that we know we would like to see with partners and allies. I think it is a very situation-specific question that we like to take one at a time as we work with them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, and as you know, sir, the foundation of many of these efforts is relationships. I traveled out with Mr. Bush to Eurosatory in July to meet with many of our European partners. I was at Land Forces 2024 with Mr. Bang in Australia a couple weeks ago. We planned on sending a team out to IDEX in Abu Dhabi in February. But the point of all those visits is to make sure we have good, transparent, open lines of communication with our foreign partners so that they understand when our contract awards are, when our deliveries, what our modernization strategies are. Because if they know that, then they can budget and plan around it. And if they can maintain alignment with U.S. Army modernization, then it's likely that collectively we're going to be able to be more integrated, more composite, because we will likely need their assistance in any conflict or struggle we find ourselves in.
How much alignment with U.S. Army modernization do you think is going to be necessary? In as much as there's lots of different countries, they have their different approaches.
Well, I'm biased, so I'll say a lot, but I'll back off on that because it could be easy to miscommunicate what alignment looks like, right? So I will often tell a foreign partner, I said, you don't have to buy the entire suite of capability that we're procuring within my portfolio. I'll tell you, if you just buy IBCS today and integrate it with your legacy indigenous architecture, it will take what you have and make it better. Because IBCS makes the whole greater than the sum of the individual components. Because without an integrating function, every system is acting independently within a stovepipe. And when you have independent air missile defense systems on the battlefield, you have gaps in coverage and you have seams that can be exploited. And so an ability just to integrate significantly increases their own indigenous capability. And I believe that's an affordable proposition that then gives them options in the future if they were to proceed down that path.
Well, here's another question. This is directed to you, General Gainey, but I suspect that a couple people might want to answer this and perhaps in doing so address specifically some Guam defense system things. The question is, could you discuss the relationship between SMDC and MDA? What's the level of integration and partnering in the overall approach to missile defense?
Heath Collins, the director of Missile Defense Agency, and myself have a great working relationship. We intertwine when you look at what we do with the TP-2 radar in the THAAD system. We work very closely together in those areas. But overall, we have a great relationship as Missile Defense Agency looks at how they're going to move forward in the area of missile defense and how in my role as a Space Missile Defense Commander in the Enterprise Army Air Missile Defense Integrator role, there's a natural synchronization there. But right now, the official relationship is mainly through the TP-2 in the THAAD system that we work. Missile Defense, we run it. Our operators man it. Missile Defense Agency continues to provide upgrades for that system. And as missile defense agencies look at as they employ the Guam defensive system, there's a natural synergy there because that architecture, as that architecture comes together, there's going to be more and more integration between the Army and Missile Defense Agency. And the way we share the headquarters together, and so we're able to work closely together as all things Army, Air, and Missile Defense and the things that Missile Defense Agency are doing, we find opportunities to work outside of those few areas that we have.
And the Guam defense system is really the forcing function for putting these pieces together, as you were talking about, in terms of Aegis fire control and IBCS and THAAD, all these different things, so that you don't all shoot the same thing.
That's correct.
Yeah. Another question for you, General Lozano. What's the relationship of non-program of record solutions in increasing capability and capacity for to maintain operational tempo?
Yeah, so I think we are challenged with non-program of record solutions from a tyranny of the now perspective. We can't, from a material perspective, we can't be so close-minded that we discount non-program of record solutions. And I think it's also important to highlight that the program of record term or phrase means something very different than what it meant 10 years ago. We have a very incredibly adaptive acquisition framework that a very smart gentleman by the name of Mr. Kevin Fahey created when he was the ASDA working for Ms. Lord. And that allows us to develop, acquire, and produce capabilities in a lot of different ways based off of the urgency and the need, right? So, but there is a place for getting non-POR types of capabilities into theater, and I'll highlight a very recent example. Back in January, there was a Rapid Acquisition Authority approval that recolored some funding, provided it to me to buy 6 Eagle systems. These are Humvee-mounted APKWS, COIR camera, laser rangefinder systems that fire, the prime is MSI, that fires, the BAE Hydro rocket with the APKWS front end, right? And so we procured those. We did some limited testing on our end. We leveraged mainly Navy testing done on their end. And we've deployed those capabilities forward into CENTCOM. CENTCOM is in an environment where the counter-UAS fight is a critical facet of what's going on there every day. So we can't let bureaucratic things like programs of record slow us down from getting a good solution out there fast while we continue to evolve existing programs of record to potentially meet the ultimate need, right? You have to be agile and flexible enough these days to do both. And so I do believe that there is a place for the urgent non-program of record solution while we continue to evolve and improve our base program of record capabilities.
Can I jump in on that? And Frank will appreciate this because I've actually run him a little bit through his paces on this very topic in my office, as you probably remember. I do think it's really important to get at the underlying issue of the question, which is, the technology in this particular space is, especially in counter-UAS solutions, it is evolving so rapidly that our own institutional processes in the Department of Defense, we really have a hard time keeping up with it. And it's not that we don't recognize the threat. It's not that we don't want to be flexible and agile. I think it is setting ourselves up to adapt to it within certain fixed constraints that we are always going to have. For example, you have to wait 2 years for appropriated funds to show up to be able to meet the threat that you planned 2 years ago to be able to buy capability to engage against. We have the ability to reprogram money in the year of execution. But sometimes we have to go through our processes to basically tie that to an urgent, very, very direct and dire threat. And we have ways to do it, and we've done it. And I think that Frank Lozano's team has done a fantastic job. But what he said earlier was really important. The way that we can help ourselves is by structuring our programs of record with enough flexibility and bandwidth, for lack of a better word, to be able to do that rapid tech insertion so that we can switch out components, buy new technology, conduct competitions within an umbrella program to bring in new non-traditional vendors if needed in certain cases so that we can bring new solutions to this problem set. So the umbrella programs of record in many ways are just that. They are umbrellas. And within those programs, for example, General Lozano can conduct a competition for a new fire control system, a new interceptor, a new sensor or component to a sensor that might address, a near-term immediate gap or one that we see evolving very quickly. The other thing that the Army has asked for, and that we've talked a lot about recently, is now that we've structured our programs that way, if we can get a little bit of flexibility in the way the funding is appropriated to us, it will allow General Lozano and his team to be able to bring in all of these non-POR systems to bear into the program of record very, very, very quickly in the year of execution. So that's how it all comes together, and that's what we're requesting.
So I think some of you have been alluding in part to the speed of contracting that needs to be done to get there. But I don't want to dispute or be perceived to be disputing anything you just said, but I want to give a counter example, which is some lasers sent to CENTCOM, prototypes, right? But because they don't have the .mil PF trail, the ONS stuff, invariably they're going to run into problems. And so the need for adaptability, it seems to be that we also need more adaptability on the .mil PF piece, yes, not just the buying of stuff or the creation of prototypes, right?
That's absolutely true. But I think the only way we're going to learn that is, as the Secretary said this morning, Secretary said, we need to field to learn. And in many cases, that's what we're doing by deploying these operational prototypes in a condition where we understand about their reliability. We know what it takes to maintain them and support them. We know what we can do with soldiers and what we need to ship back in order to deal with in a lab, for example. And these are all things we're learning, not just on our end, but also on the vendor side, so that as we continue to mature these capabilities and bring them into the force, we ultimately know what's going to work against the threat.
Well, we're wrapping up on time here. I've tried to weave in the themes of many of your questions into here. I want to end with a question which is a giant question right now, and it's close to your heart, General Gainey, and that's the counter-UAS. Reportedly, Project Replicator 2 will prioritize CUAS, and I'm curious to get you all's perceptions on that. In so doing, I want to pull the thread you raised, General Lozano, about cost. And Heidi Shue talked about the importance of competition and all this kind of stuff. How do you weigh cost versus schedule? How do you think about those things? Perhaps in the vein of CUAS, but also more broadly, because that affects your acquisition strategy. That affects when you down select and all this. How quickly you just pick somebody and say go. So CUAS is a big umbrella, very current thing, but these acquisition questions as affects it.
And do you want to start, General Gini?
So, great question. And what I would offer is that we are in the business of empowering our soldiers to be combat effective. That in and of itself is a different type of business case analysis than most other organizations or entities would ever perform. It's about saving lives, and it's about ensuring that when they're met with a threat, whatever that threat may be, they destroy it, and they're successful, right? So I preface that way, in that manner, because sometimes it's important to pay a premium to go fast, to get something relevant and capable out into the field while we give ourselves some time and maneuver space to perform a contract competition, to solicit industry to understand what new and creative ideas might exist, to maybe fund a short-lived developmental effort that results in greater, more affordable capability. I think we're capable of walking and chewing bubble gum, and really the threat that we're facing now has driven us to that type of paradigm where we have to be prepared to pay the cost to increase effectiveness while we are able to manipulate the scenario to generate the outcome that we need, which is both a capable solution that's also affordable, that can be produced at mass and scale and then deployed forward.
Okay, I'll talk. That was a great answer, Frank, so no need to continue to highlight that piece, but there's a balance. So as you look at the counter-UAS fight, overseas where we have a lot more authorities, a lot more capabilities, and you do it in a homeland where we're more restricted, and you look across the .mil PF piece, and I was writing a few things down, if you look at the organization piece, outside of what I highlighted as an integrated air and missile defense incorporation, where we're growing limited organization capability inside our division, there's otherwise no organization for counter-UAS, and we're going to rely a lot on our soldiers to be able to get that. So that creates a challenge. Same with the training piece. We will train our air defenders in a certain aspect of that, but the overarching training, we've started with Joint Counter-UAS Academy that stood up at Fort Sill, but holistically getting after this, integrating it, making it institutionalized is something that's going to be a challenge, especially as you start employing this capability overseas and in CONUS, several locations, because again, because this threat is so wide and varying, you have to have several individuals able to man this system and be able to get after this threat. And then you look at the policy piece of it. I highlighted how in theater we're less restrictive, so we're able to really leverage the full kit of capability that we have. In CONUS, we have a few more restrictions, and then the leadership as we continue to train our leaders. That's probably the biggest gap we have right now. I sit through several forums with joint senior leaders, and as we're talking counter-UAS, there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of understanding. So as that continues to grow, there's challenge. But we have to get the capability, and that's the biggest challenge. We have to get the capability out there in the hands of warfighters, because if we wouldn't have done that, I look at things like the Coyote interceptor. If we wouldn't have gotten the Coyote out there fast and quickly in the hands of our soldiers are the ones that made it better to the point now we're on revision 3, and it's a much better capability than we originally had. And in Stride, we were training our soldiers on how to man and to employ that capability while we're doing catch-up on the other aspect of the .mil PF. I believe that risk was worth it to where we got to where we were able to protect our soldiers across the CENTCOM AOR and potentially other locations. But it is a balance. It is a balance, and it's something and I know the Army is looking at closely. How do we take the .mil PF framework, lay that on top of what we're developing from a counter UAS perspective, and get it ingrained to where our soldiers are confident in their training. Maybe not an organization, but leaders understand it, and then they have the authorities to leverage that capability here in CONUS.
Close this out?
Could I jump on that real quick?
Sure.
There's another important aspect to that, and that's the layered defensive approach that we employ, right? So a Coyote interceptor is right about 120K now, right? We're not gonna win that cost curve battle if all we do is deal with a threat kinetically. So to the under's point, we're looking at directed energy solutions. We're also very focused on electronic warfare solutions, where the cost curve is very much in our favor, right? So if we continue to round out that architecture, I think we're able to get to the cost control measures that we all want to be able to exploit.
Well, I will actually want to thank you for hosting a fantastic conversation today on which, we probably only scratched the surface on the number of topics I'm sure that we could have all discussed today. I hope everyone got a sense of the Army's commitment to this mission because it is quite profound. And I would say much more deeply than that, our commitment to the soldiers who perform this mission every single day. I can't emphasize enough how much we appreciate their sacrifice, their dedication, and their professionalism. And we owe it to them not only to be mindful of the high op-tempo issues we talked about earlier, but also to continue to provide them the very best capability there is to offer. And I thought your question was fantastic when you talked about looking at this from a different time horizons. We will never take risk with a soldier's life near term. We will obviously pay whatever it requires to return that soldier back home safely. But I think as we're looking down the road, it is about placing the right bets in terms of technology, in terms of software integration with IBCS, in terms of different modular composite formations that can be tailored to meet future needs, giving commanders in the future many multiple options to deal with this threat, because we know that the environment continues to be very congested and contested by threats that go from small UAVs all the way to hypersonics. So I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you.
It's a measure of the salience of how many things we didn't get to that's in your portfolio. So please join me in thanking the panelists for a great discussion.
On behalf of AUSA, thank you, Dr. Carrico, and all the members of the panel for this rousing discussion. Before we part, please note that AUSA's Education Zone is at the end of the hall. There you can find a variety of papers and educational resources focused on topics much like were discussed here today. In addition, you can share why you serve by participating in the graphic art illustration or recording an impromptu message with our podcast team. Your message could be released at a later date, heard by over 15,000 listeners. Finally, thank you for attending, and be sure to check out one of our contemporary military forums tomorrow.